Hey guys, I hate that I'm not be able to be there with y'all, but I am still in Atlanta with my little John, doing some tests and several different things. So I appreciate y'all doing well for Miss Wise. Just hang in there with me for just a little while longer. So I'm going to do some teaching videos for y'all that you can follow along with your notes, make sure you have the correct answers and highlight. So chapter 3, we're looking at expansion and establishment of the American colonies. Right. So the first section, 3.1, is colonial diversity. Move my little picture here out of the way. All right. In the early years of colonization, the largest groups of settlers came from Europe. Nearly 10,000 people settled in Massachusetts Bay during the colony's first 10 years, which is an event called the Great Migration. This was a time of just a lot of people coming into the American colonies, into the Massachusetts Bay colony. After the first waves, immigration slowed until the early 1700s, but the colonies kept growing. It was a thing called natural increase. This is where the colonies began, people in the colonies began to have children, and those children had children. And it's a process of the population growing naturally, not people coming over from another country. And it was more important to the colonies than immigration because it began to make America what it is. Most of the settlers that came to America were from England. They brought their English customs, language, their style of government, and it eventually influenced all of the colonies. The Germans began coming into the colonies around the beginning of the 1700s. By the late 1700s, German settlers composed nearly 1/3 of Pennsylvania's population. Many of these Germans were Lutherans who came to America for religious freedom. Lutherans are Protestants who follow the teachings of Martin Luther. Today in Pennsylvania, there's a large concentration of what's called the Pennsylvania Dutch. These are people who come from Germany, settled in that area, and the culture is still very heavily influenced by the German culture there. The Scots-Irish made up the second largest group of immigrants to the U.S., not the U.S. at the time, sorry, to the American colonies. They came from Northern Ireland, but had a Scottish heritage. They were strong Presbyterians. Looking at some of the other smaller groups, strong Dutch presence in New Netherlands, which became New York. The French Huguenots were particularly strong in coastal South Carolina. The Huguenots, if you'll remember, are the French Protestants. The Africans, the first Africans who came to the New World, came as indentured servants. But their situation soon degenerated into perpetual slavery for different reasons, whether they continued to become in debt to their to the people who held their indenture, or they would get in trouble. Different reasons brought them to this place. As Southern planters discovered their need for cheap labor, they relied more and more on slaves from Africa. Northerners used slaves most often as servants in upper-class homes, not as farmhands. The Africans' journey to the New World was called the Middle Passage because it was the middle part of the trade ships' route around the Atlantic. If you look at the map, you can see if you go from England down to Africa and then back up to the United States, it kind of makes a triangle there. And if I was there in the classroom, I usually draw it out for you there on the map. And you may remember this from last year, us talking about this. Well, the passage from Africa to the United States is the middle part of that triangle. So it was called the Middle Passage. The frontier was the undeveloped area at the edge of settled areas. So the frontier would move as people began making settlements. The frontier began to move out. Settlers usually followed the rivers inland. It was the easiest way to be able to get inland. There wasn't the roads, there wasn't railroads at this time. So the easiest thing to be able to do was to follow the rivers. Many settlers also began following wilderness trails southward along the Appalachian Mountains. The main north-south highway became known as the Great Wagon Road. So this is section 3.2. So today we will pick up with, on Friday, you'll pick up with 3.2. So you stop the video here and then come back to it tomorrow. So, or you can go ahead and continue and just knowing you have your other work that you need to do, okay? So 3.2 is colonial economies. The colonists had to depend mainly on what they could make or what they could grow on or near their land. This was especially true for the farmers who made up 90% of the colonists. So the number one occupation among the colonists was farming. Most farmers were subsistence farmers, which means they could only raise just enough crops and livestock to be able to provide for their families. They didn't have enough to be able to sell to give out to anybody else. There was no surplus. It was enough just to take care of their families. Even colonists who were not farmers had to depend on locally grown food, either that someone else grew for them, or they would have gardens. They didn't have a supermarket to be able to go to. They didn't have Walmart or Food Line that they could just go and buy their groceries. They had to depend on another farmer to grow the food for them, or they had to grow it themselves. Many also use local resources for their work. And we'll look at that more as we get into the different categories of the different regions. But if it was like the New England colonies, they would focus a lot on fishing because they had such a wide coastline. So the geography of New England is rough compared to that of other regions in America. They weren't able to farm as well because of the thin, rocky soil that was there. It had short growing season, long, cold, snowy winters. So farming just wasn't a big deal there. So they had to look for other things. And they looked to the ocean for their livelihood. They fished off the coast of New England, off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. Also had a lot of timber for shipbuilding. As you had fishermen, you needed the ships. So they specialized in building these ships. The middle colonies had a lot of rivers that they could use to be able to navigate, to be able to move people and supplies down the rivers. So these rivers acted as highways. They also had fertile coastal plains that allowed settlers to grow cereal grains such as corn, oats, barley, and wheat. This area has kind of been known as the bread basket of America because it's where a lot of these cereal grains, a lot of the grains that makes our breads and different kinds of grains are at. They're called the bread colonies. Settlers in the western part of the middle colonies also trapped animals for fur, and their fur would be used for clothing and different things. In the southern colony, agriculture was a primary activity because they had rich soil and a long growing season. Their main crops, which these are cash crops, were tobacco, rice, and indigo. They had large farms called plantations, and it was a major part of Southern culture. They didn't have a lot of other industries there because they focused mainly on slaves. The planters there who had the money to be able to invest, they wanted more land and more slaves, so they didn't focus on growing the industry, which would later come back and hurt the American colonies. Excuse me, not just the American colonies, the southern part of this country. So the South's wide coastal plain, called the Tidewater, which is land along rivers and inlets, gave colonies plenty of flat farmland. Many colonists became subsistent farmers in the inland Piedmont, which are the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The largest food crop in all the colonies was corn, also known as maize. Triangular trade. This is what we were talking about with the Middle Passage whenever I was talking about it forming a triangle on the map. I'm going to go ahead and skip right over here to this. If you need to get the answers from the slide, just come back and pause it. So you can see the different routes that are here, and I wish I could point it out to you and you can kind of look at it, but you can look at it and see going from England to Africa and then North America and then back to England, it makes a route. And sometimes they would go from England to North America to Africa and back again. So there was different ways to go. So England to America brought manufactured goods to America. America to England, they would get whale oil, lumber, furs, rum, rice. Africa to England got gold, ivory, spices. England to Africa, manufactured goods. From Africa to America with slaves. And then from America to Africa, we had iron, textiles, rum. So all three of these parts needed something from each other. So it became the triangular trade because it makes a triangle. All right, so we're going to stop here. Lord willing, we'll be able to cover 3.3 on Monday, and Lord willing, I will be back with you. If not, I will do a different video for you to be able to pick up there. So Miss Wise has the rest of your instructions. She'll be able to finish everything out for you. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or shoot me a text. I'm not really able to take phone calls, but if you want to send an email or text, I can answer what I can. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good rest of your day.